I feel like I'm walking around in a video game or a movie, not in real life. Reddit user Avelbane's description of the mental state described as derealization is one that matches the consensus of what this intense state of dissociation tends to create in the mind. Objects suddenly not having names, people and places looking distinctly artificial, and worst of all, a looming sense of the truth that everything around you is in fact very real, are common staples of derealization disorder. The medical community seems to agree that dissociative disorders like derealization and its ego-affecting cousin depersonalization affect about 2% of the population today. The National Organization for Rare Disorders tells us that, quote, the disorder most commonly affects the individuals between the ages of 15 and 30, end quote. In a relatively post-quarantine world, December of 2021 by this recording, the narrative of this seemingly rare condition has changed, giving a number of teenagers a glimpse into the facade of unmistakable reality. All this begs the question: have the traumas of COVID-19 isolation protocols and/or early childhood development caused a spike in dissociation cases? While this will take years of research to identify and years more to fully answer, we can draw some close associations between the two. Let's unpack that a bit, shall we? Before we begin, there are a few pieces of vocabulary that we will need to establish, each with their own unique differences and uses. Derealization has been described above as a state of mind in which a patient's surroundings do not appear real. Depersonalization stems from a similar state of mind, this time affecting a patient's ego. Dissociation, for the sake of this essay, will be used as an umbrella term for both. As we proceed, it is important to recognize that dissociation itself is not inherently a bad thing. According to Karl Dieserath, a PhD professor of bioengineering, psychiatry, and behavioral sciences at Stanford University, quote, this state often manifests as the perception of being on the outside, looking in the cockpit of the plane that is your body or mind, and what you're seeing you just don't consider to be yourself, end quote. Dissociation is used to categorize daily activities such as daydreaming, fantasizing, and highway hypnosis, making its application to psychiatric lingo incredibly vast. Finally, we may move on to the most intricate concept of our inspection: ego. In its broadest definition, ego generally means our sense of self that ties us to our unique traits. This definition is where ego often finds itself misunderstood. Sigmund Freud identifies ego as the middle ground between the id, or the impulse center of the self, and the superego, or the moral center of the self. In this sense, ego is more than one's pride or even personality. Ego is the connection between a person's sense of self and their sense of the world around them. Let's take a look at our brains for just a moment. Scientists have identified the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC, and the frontoinsular cortex, or FIC, as the ego center of the brain. Furthermore, we've discovered that self-awareness is central to the ACC, insular cortex, and medial prefrontal cortex exclusively, allowing for any change in the development of these areas to cause damage to a person's ego in the right circumstances. A study conducted in 2007 confirmed that when rats experienced prolonged social isolation at an early age, the production of a calcium-binding protein called calbindin D28K, or CAD, was significantly reduced in the medial prefrontal cortex. For the layman, this means that social isolation at an early age physically changes the development of the brain, and, worse, the core of our ego that we identified earlier. Knowing that the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until the age of 25, it is to be assumed that these malformations are directly responsible for disorders stemming from this region of the brain. Furthermore, trauma develops the same effect, with emotional control also stemming from this region. Worse, a 2015 study concluded that the amygdala, the gland responsible for emotional charge, is also thrown out of sync, causing a dangerous imbalance between emotional reactions and their mediation. I'm aware that this description may not be helping. In clearest terms, trauma and isolation at early stages of development have been commonly connected to a lack of vital growth in the region of the brain that controls our sense of self and how it adapts to our surroundings. These circumstances create the building blocks for dissociative disorders in young adolescents who find themselves within the predicted 2%. In our case, nothing is better than the quarantines associated with the COVID-19 epidemic for a lasting prediction as to the danger of this correlation and, furthermore, its prevalence in our society. Unfortunately, this predicted increase doesn't stem purely from adolescent isolation. Since the pandemic began, there has been a notable increase in domestic violence from around the world, with cities in the United States having reached unprecedented levels. From 2019 to 2020, New York City saw a 10% increase, with San Antonio, Texas, and Portland, Oregon leading the United States, showing 18% and 22% increases, respectively. On top of that, these numbers don't hold a candle to 30% increases in Singapore and Argentina, and a 50% increase throughout Brazil in the past year alone. With 61% of abuse against women occurring between the ages of 11 and 24, and 62.1% occurring between the same ages for their male counterparts as of 2015, this upward curve places youth and young adults directly in the crossfire. Mix this with our current era of technology and social media, and you're still not even close to all the major factors that place young adults at risk. It is important to remember that, amongst all of this, I'm no doctor, and the research presented here is done so for the purposes of entertainment and maybe a little bit of education. Considering that, it is curious to consider the dangers of self-diagnosing one of these dissociative disorders. If we break our earlier 2% into strata with the help of the Recovery Village, an online rehab center, we discover that, as of December 2020, up to 66% of people who have experienced a traumatic event, 30% of war veterans, 11% of people who suffer a major head injury, and as many as 79% of people who struggle with acute stress experience some sort of dissociative disorder. When considering these numbers, the potential for self-diagnosis becomes significantly larger, and with about 200,000 Americans experiencing some sort of dissociative event each day, it becomes even more so. So, at the high school level specifically, what happens when students, most likely due to a mixture of social, emotional, and academic pressure, find themselves experiencing a state of mind that has no direct cure and often goes unexplained, or worse, denied? Recovery Village tells us that it leads to a country in which 58.5% of high school seniors have tried alcohol, with 22% having driven or driven with another person under the influence of alcoholic substances. 17% of all students misuse amphetamines and or Adderall, and 16% of high school seniors having used marijuana within 1 month of questioning. All of these substances are not only readily available to teenagers through local black markets, but used by representative members of society just as frequently. While this is no secret, its influence in self-medication due to diagnosis is exceedingly dangerous to student success in high school and post-secondary education. As of 2013, high school dropouts were more likely to be marijuana users, 27.3% of dropouts versus 15.3% of non-dropouts, and non-medical users of prescription drugs, 9.5% of dropouts versus 5.1% of students. These percentages, while still significant, provide a false narrative that self-prescriptions only provide small margins between high school students and dropouts. Let me put these into perspective. A study conducted by the National Institute on Drug Abuse from the same year concluded that nearly 1/3 of high school dropouts reported their use of alcohol or other drugs as a contributing factor in their decision. It is abundantly clear that dissociative disorders have the potential to cause a dangerous snowball effect that will place the future of the human race in educational jeopardy. It would be beautiful to see the 2% and hope beyond hope that 2% is all it will be. Unfortunately, this couldn't be farther from the truth. Students experiencing dissociative disorders can be found all around us, and with the rise of social isolation and turmoil, this increase does not seem to be slowing anytime soon. All we can do is work to gain as much direct research as possible, and with that sentiment in mind, field research, in heavy quotation marks, is exactly what I set out to do. I was 16 when the world came online again. When I got back to my school, and more importantly to those I was close with, I came to discover that many people around me had begun to or were already experiencing dissociative disorders. This scenario created a unique opportunity, allowing me to see firsthand how adolescents from various backgrounds reacted to not only COVID-19, but to dissociation itself. Out of 4 students that I interviewed, similar patterns continued to be prevalent, such as the idea of seeing themselves in the third person, not feeling as if they were in their own body, feeling fake in a bad way. This led to an inability to pay attention, led to the idea that they were living in a reality that wasn't reality. It caused differences in their actions, like an inability to look at their hands or arms without experiencing this third-person effect, realizing that they couldn't remember past events, and all of them said that it was most often triggered by sensory overload. All 4 of them stated that dissociation could occur anywhere at any time, that it caused social issues, and one even reported that it occurred while driving. Many said that it could happen in dangerous situations, and all reported that it caused a lasting afterglow throughout the rest of the day. They all stated that it shut them down. They couldn't do anything, one reporting especially when looking at their hands. They agreed that the only fix was sleeping or mental rest, and many of them felt as if they didn't have the energy to continue functioning for the rest of the day. For 3 of them, the syndrome began between 8th grade and 11th grade, but one reported experiencing it as early as 3rd grade, tying back to traumatic experiences that were mentioned in scientific studies earlier. 2 of them reported that they were taking medications, one antidepressants, the other anxiety, and 2 of them had no medication prescribed, regardless of seeing very similar experiences as those who were taking medications. Dissociation is confusing, to say the least. When the world is so out of sync that it weaves itself into people's lives at such a terrifying rate, it can be unnerving to see. Amongst all of this, at the end of the day, as much as people may believe that they're alone in these experiences, many people feel the same. In fact, a lot of them might be right next to you. At the end of the day, it's important to remember that the brain is a weird thing, and even if you've been predisposed to it, even if it seems as if the whole universe is against you, there is light. It's through the work of researchers like the ones referenced here that bring us closer to a solution, closer to a world in which we know how to cope. Sometimes it's weird to just say that I don't feel like the world exists, but really, the world exists right beside you.